From a one-day role that exploded into stardom to Berry Gordy filming in his own house, Lady Sings the Blues is packed with surprising secrets behind Diana Ross's Oscar-nominated debut. Discover how a terrible screen test actually won someone the lead role, why Paramount abandoned ship mid-production, and the bizarre historical error that appears within the first 5 seconds, plus 12 more fascinating facts you never knew about this groundbreaking biopic. Fact 1. Opening credits contain immediate historical error. Lady Sings the Blues opens with a dramatic scene showing Billie Holiday being arrested and booked for narcotics possession, with large letters flashing across the screen reading New York City, 1936. The problem is that this creates one of the most glaring historical errors in the entire film, and it happens within the first 5 seconds of the movie. Billie Holiday was not arrested for drug possession in 1936 at all. Her first arrest for narcotics actually occurred in May of 1949, a full 13 years later than the film depicts. At the time the movie claimed she was being thrown into jail, the real Billie Holiday was actually still performing in small clubs throughout Harlem and was just beginning to build her reputation as a jazz singer. During the mid-1930s, most historians and biographers agree that Holiday had not yet begun using heroin, with her drug use not starting until sometime in the early 1940s. The arrest shown in the film's opening was meant to set up the movie's flashback structure, where Holiday reflects on her difficult life while suffering through withdrawal in a padded prison cell. While this framing device works effectively from a dramatic storytelling perspective, the screenwriters appear to have moved the timeline backward by more than a decade to fit their narrative structure. This wasn't the only historical liberty the film took with Holiday's life story, but it remains the most immediate and noticeable one since it happens before the movie has even properly begun. The error is particularly striking because the date appears in such bold, prominent text during the opening credits, making it impossible for anyone familiar with Holiday's actual biography to miss. Fact 2. Richard Pryor's role. Expanded from one-day Richard Pryor was originally hired to appear in Lady Sings the Blues for just a single day of filming, playing a minor character known as Piano Man, who was supposed to be a small supporting role in the background of Billie Holiday's story. However, when Pryor showed up on set and the cameras started rolling, everyone immediately realized they had something special happening right in front of them. Director Sidney Furie and producer Berry Gordy were so blown away by Pryor's natural talent and the incredible chemistry he had with Diana Ross that they made the decision right then and there to expand his part significantly. The filmmakers literally began rewriting the script during production to give Pryor more scenes throughout the rest of the movie, transforming what was meant to be a one-day bit part into one of the film's most memorable supporting roles. Pryor's character, Piano Man, became a composite of several real musicians who were close to Billie Holiday during her life, serving as her friend, confidant, and musical accompanist throughout the film. Beyond just his acting abilities, Pryor also helped Diana Ross prepare for some of the movie's most challenging scenes by teaching her how people behaved while under the influence of drugs, drawing on his own life experiences to make those moments more authentic and believable. The decision to expand Pryor's role turned out to be one of the best choices the production team made, as his warm and genuine performance provided crucial emotional support to Ross's character and added moments of levity and friendship to an otherwise dark and difficult story about addiction and struggle in the music industry. Fact 3. Billy Dee Williams had the worst screen test. Billy Dee Williams landed the role of Louis McKay in Lady Sings the Blues, despite having what was reportedly the worst screen test of all the actors who auditioned for the part. The filmmakers were considering several talented actors for the male lead role, including Paul Winfield, who would go on to earn an Oscar nomination that same year for his performance in Sounder, and who actually delivered a much stronger and more polished screen test than Williams. On the day of his audition, Williams showed up without his reading glasses and completely forgot his lines, creating what should have been a disaster of a tryout that would normally end any chance of getting cast in a major Hollywood production. However, when the production team watched the screen test footage, something remarkable became immediately obvious to everyone in the room. Despite all of his technical mistakes and fumbled lines, the magnetic chemistry between Williams and Diana Ross was absolutely undeniable and practically jumped off the screen. Screenwriter Suzanne de Passe later recalled that Williams probably had the worst screen test of all the actors they brought in, but when his test came up for review, the stunning chemistry he shared with Ross was so powerful and so evident that it overshadowed everything else. Berry Gordy himself recognized this special quality and saw that Williams possessed exactly what the film needed, which was someone who could create believable romantic tension and serve as what Gordy called a Black Clark Gable for young black audiences who deserved to see glamorous leading men on screen who looked like them. Fact 4. Berry Gordy bought back the entire film. Berry Gordy's commitment to Lady Sings the Blues became so intense that he ended up buying back the entire film from Paramount Pictures when the studio wanted to abandon the project midway through production. The film's budget had originally been set at $2 million when Paramount agreed to finance it, but costs quickly spiraled out of control as Gordy insisted on perfection in every single element of the production, from the elaborate period costumes to the meticulously recreated 1930s Harlem Street sets. When Paramount studio head Frank Yablans learned that the budget had ballooned by several $million beyond the original agreement, he summoned Gordy to New York for a meeting where Yablans made it clear that the studio would not invest more than $2 million in what he called a black film. Yablans essentially told Gordy that if he wanted to continue making the movie the way he envisioned it, he would need to write Paramount a check to buy them out of their investment. Rather than compromise his vision or abandon the project entirely, Gordy made the extraordinary decision to personally raise the remaining budget money and bought out Paramount's entire stake in the production, giving Motown complete ownership and control over the film. Paramount remained involved only as the domestic distributor, which meant they would handle getting the movie into theaters, but no longer had any creative say or financial stake in the actual production. This bold financial gamble demonstrated just how much faith Gordy had in both Diana Ross and the project itself, and it gave him the freedom to shoot as much footage as needed without studio interference. Fact 5. Gordy's own home became a film set. Berry Gordy's personal Los Angeles home was transformed into a filming location for Lady Sings the Blues, specifically serving as the drug rehabilitation clinic where Billie Holiday gets arrested for narcotics possession in one of the film's most dramatic scenes. While most of the movie was shot at major studio lots like Universal Studios and Warner Brothers, along with various other California locations, Gordy made the unusual decision to open up his own private residence to the cast and crew for this particular sequence. The scene takes place during a pivotal moment in the film when Billie has checked herself into a treatment facility to try to overcome her heroin addiction, and Louis McKay has been secretly paying for her care without her knowledge. It's at this clinic, represented by Gordy's actual home, where police arrive and arrest Billie for drug possession, forcibly removing her from the facility despite her attempts to get clean. Using his own house as a film set demonstrates just how deeply invested Gordy was in every aspect of the production, willing to turn his personal space into a working movie set to achieve the exact look and feel he wanted for the film. This decision also reflects the level of control Gordy maintained over the entire project, especially after he bought out Paramount's stake and took on full financial responsibility for the production. The choice to film in his home gave Gordy the flexibility to shoot without worrying about studio rental costs or time constraints, allowing the cast and crew to take as long as needed to capture the emotional intensity of this critical turning point in Billie Holiday's story. Fact 6. Suzanne de Passe made Oscar history. Suzanne de Passe made Academy Award history when she received an Oscar nomination for Best Screenplay for Lady Sings the Blues, becoming the first African-American woman ever to be nominated in any non-acting category in the entire history of the Academy Awards. De Passe was working as Berry Gordy's creative assistant at Motown when Gordy asked her to review the original screenplay written by Terrence McCloy and give him her honest feedback about it. She came back with a list of about 100 things that needed to be changed or improved, which led Gordy to ask her to work directly with director Sidney Furie on rewriting the script alongside fellow Motown recording artist Chris Clark. DePass later recalled that the original screenplay contained a number of stereotypical and even offensive elements that needed to be completely reworked to create a more authentic and respectful portrayal of Billie Holiday's life. One example she remembered was a telephone conversation between Billie and Louis where Billie tells him to touch your balls for luck, which DePass felt was not only stereotypical but also disrespectful to the characters. She and Clark worked to make the script more glamorous and romantic while removing these problematic elements, adding touches like the scene where Billie brings a red hat as a gift to her mother. The 1973 Oscar nomination for Best Writing recognized all three screenwriters together, making it a historic moment that would stand for decades, as DePass remained one of only 2 African-American women nominated for a Screenplay Oscar as of 2022. Fact 7. Real Billie Holiday musicians played on soundtrack. Several musicians who had actually performed alongside the real Billie Holiday during her lifetime were brought in to record the instrumental tracks for the Lady Sings the Blues soundtrack, creating a direct musical connection between the film and the legendary singer it portrayed. Among these veteran jazz musicians was trumpeter Harry Sweets Edison, who had worked with Holiday during her career and brought his authentic sound and style to the film's recordings. Guitarist John Collins, who had also played with Holiday, contributed his guitar and banjo work to the soundtrack, while bassist Red Holloway added his deep understanding of Holiday's musical world to the recording sessions. These musicians were part of a larger ensemble that included other notable jazz artists of the era, all working under the direction of conductor and arranger Gil Askey to create the film's musical backdrop. Diana Ross had pre-recorded all of the vocal performances for the soundtrack before filming began, using a mixture of her own distinctive singing style combined with certain nuances and phrasing techniques that echoed Holiday's approach without directly imitating her voice. The decision to bring in musicians who had actually worked with Holiday added a layer of authenticity and historical connection to the soundtrack that went beyond just recreating the sound of the era. The soundtrack became Motown's fastest-selling album up to that point and eventually reached #1 on the Billboard album chart in 1973, holding that top position for 2 weeks and introducing a new generation of listeners to Billie Holiday's musical legacy through Diana Ross's interpretations. Fact 8. Dorothy Dandridge was originally cast. Dorothy Dandridge was attached to star as Billie Holiday in multiple planned film adaptations of the singer's autobiography throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, but tragically died before any of these versions could move forward into actual production. Hollywood had been eager to bring Holiday's story to the screen almost immediately after her autobiography was published in 1956, recognizing both the dramatic power of her life story and the commercial potential of a biographical film about such an iconic performer. Producer Lester Cowan partnered with director Anthony Mann on one of the earliest proposed versions in 1956, with Dandridge as their first choice to portray Holiday on screen. Producer Philip Waxman secured a verbal agreement from Dandridge in 1959 for another planned adaptation. And producer Albert Zugsmith also had plans to feature Dandridge in yet another version that was announced in 1960, which would have started as a Broadway musical before becoming a film. Dandridge remained the consistent front-runner and preferred choice across all of these different attempts to bring the project to life, as she was one of the most prominent and talented African-American actresses of her generation and seemed like the natural fit for such an important role. However, all of these planned productions fell apart for various reasons before filming could begin, and Dandridge passed away in 1965 at the age of 42, ending any possibility of her ever playing the part. It would be another 7 years before Lady Sings the Blues finally made it to theaters with Diana Ross in the role that Dandridge had been meant to play. Fact 9. Levi Stubbs turned down the lead male. Levi Stubbs, the powerful baritone lead singer of the Four Tops, was Berry Gordy's original first choice to play Louis McKay opposite Diana Ross in Lady Sings the Blues. But Stubbs turned down the opportunity for reasons that had nothing to do with his acting ability or interest in the project. The Four Tops were one of Motown's most successful acts during the 1960s and early 1970s, and Stubbs was the unmistakable voice behind their string of hit songs, making him a natural consideration for Gordy when thinking about who could bring star power and musical credibility to the male lead role. However, when Gordy approached Stubbs about taking the part, the timing simply didn't work out because the Four Tops were scheduled to be touring through Europe during the film's production period, which would have made it impossible for Stubbs to commit to the extended shooting schedule. Beyond the practical scheduling conflict, Stubbs had a deeper philosophical reason for declining the role that spoke to his character and his loyalty to his bandmates. Throughout his entire career with the Four Tops, Stubbs consistently refused any offers that would have given him separate billing or pulled him away from the group for solo projects, because he didn't want to overshadow the other three members or create any division within the tight-knit quartet. This unwavering commitment to keeping the Four Tops together as equals meant that Stubbs passed on what could have been a star-making film role, leaving the door open for Billy D. Williams to ultimately win the part and launch his own successful film career. Fact 10. Modern hairstyles appear in 1930s. Scenes, Lady Sings the Blues, features a noticeable anachronism that appears throughout the film, as many of the African-American male extras and supporting characters can be seen sporting hairstyles that were popular in 1972 when the movie was made, but would have been completely out of place and non-existent during the 1930s and 1940s when the story actually takes place. Viewers with a sharp eye for historical detail will notice that numerous men in the background of scenes set in Harlem clubs and on city streets are wearing large afros and prominent sideburns, both of which were signature looks of the early 1970s Black Power movement and contemporary fashion of that era. During the actual 1930s period that much of the film depicts, African-American men typically wore their hair in very different styles, usually kept much shorter and closer to the head, with styles like conks and processed hair being more common among performers and entertainers of that time. The Afro hairstyle specifically became a powerful symbol of Black identity and pride during the civil rights movement of the 1960s and into the 1970s, making it particularly associated with that specific era rather than the Depression-era Harlem that the film was attempting to recreate. This kind of historical oversight in period films often happens when production teams either don't have the budget or the attention to detail necessary to ensure that every single extra and background performer is styled authentically for the time period being portrayed, resulting in these small but noticeable breaks from historical accuracy that can pull observant viewers out of the story. Fact 11. Film was shot in sequential order. Lady Sings the Blues was filmed in complete chronological order from beginning to end, which is an unusual approach in Hollywood, where scenes are typically shot out of sequence based on factors like location availability, actors' schedules, and budget considerations. Director Sidney Furie and the production team made the deliberate choice to film the story in the exact order that events unfold on screen, starting with the opening arrest scene and moving forward through Billie Holiday's life story scene by scene as the narrative progresses. This decision turned out to be incredibly fortunate when the filmmakers realized how talented Richard Pryor was after shooting his first scene and decided on the spot to expand his role from a one-day bit part into a major supporting character throughout the film. Because they were shooting chronologically and hadn't yet filmed the later portions of the story, the screenwriters were able to write Pryor's character Piano Man into subsequent scenes as they went along, incorporating him organically into the rest of the movie without having to go back and reshoot earlier sequences or deal with complicated continuity issues. Filming in sequence also helped Diana Ross in her first ever acting role, as she was able to experience her character's emotional journey in the same order that audiences would see it, allowing her performance to build naturally from scene to scene rather than having to jump back and forth between different emotional states on different shooting days. The chronological shooting schedule gave the entire production a more natural flow and made it easier for everyone involved to stay connected to the emotional arc of the story. Fact 12. No famous jazz musicians appear. Lady Sings the Blues presents Billie Holiday's story as if she developed her talent and career in almost complete isolation, with none of the legendary jazz musicians she actually worked alongside appearing in the film in any way, shape, or form. In reality, Holiday was a vital part of the larger jazz scene of the 1930s and 1940s, sharing stages and recording sessions with some of the biggest names in music history, including Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Teddy Wilson, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Lester Young, Johnny Hodges, and Ben Webster. Perhaps most notably absent is John Hammond, the famous producer and talent scout who discovered Holiday singing in a small Harlem club and helped launch her career, yet he never appears or is even mentioned in the film. The complete omission of these crucial figures from Holiday's life became one of the most common criticisms that music historians and jazz fans leveled at the movie when it was released. While the exact reasons for leaving out these important musicians were never officially explained by the filmmakers, many observers speculated that there may have been legal or permissions issues involved in portraying real people on screen, especially since several of these jazz legends were still alive in 1972 when the movie was being made. This decision to focus solely on Holiday's personal struggles with addiction and her romantic relationship with Louis McKay meant that the film largely ignored the rich musical collaborations and artistic community that were central to her actual life and career, presenting a much more limited view of who Billie Holiday really was. Fact 13. Diana Ross was pregnant. During filming, Diana Ross was pregnant with her daughter Rhonda Ross Kendrick while preparing for and filming Lady Sings the Blues, which made her feature film debut even more physically demanding as she took on the challenging role of Billie Holiday during her pregnancy. Principal photography for the film began on December 6, 1971, according to Ross's memoir, and continued through January of 1972, meaning that Ross was in her early months of pregnancy during the actual shooting of the movie. The timing of her pregnancy had significant implications for the film's promotional campaign, as Ross was heavily pregnant in the weeks and months leading up to Lady Sings the Blues' theatrical release in October of 1972. Which prevented her from doing many advance public appearances and interviews to promote what was supposed to be her big Hollywood debut. She was so close to her due date that she was unable to attend the film's glamorous New York City premiere, which must have been devastating for someone who had worked so hard on such an important project and naturally wanted to be part of the excitement and celebration surrounding its release. Ross gave birth to her second daughter, Tracy Ellis Ross, on October 29, 1972, which was just 3 weeks after the movie opened in theaters and while the film was still in its initial theatrical run, building momentum toward becoming a major box office success. Instead of walking red carpets and doing press tours, Ross waited at home anxiously for Berry Gordy to call her after the premiere and tell her how it went, with Gordy describing the event to her in just one word: proud. Fact 14. Excessive Oscar campaigning may have cost the award. Berry Gordy's aggressive and expensive Oscar campaign for Diana Ross may have actually cost her the Best Actress award at the 1973 Academy Awards, according to several industry insiders and one Academy voter who spoke publicly about the situation. Gordy launched an unprecedented advertising blitz in the Hollywood trade papers, taking out full-page ads for Ross almost every single day in publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, spending enormous amounts of money to keep her name and face constantly in front of Academy voters throughout the entire awards season. While Oscar campaigning was certainly nothing new in Hollywood, the sheer volume and persistence of Gordy's advertising push was seen by many as excessive and even somewhat desperate, which began to rub some Academy members the wrong way. One voter on the Academy Committee spoke to columnist James Bacon and explained the backlash quite directly, saying that Diana Ross was a runaway cinch to win the Best Actress award when she was first nominated. But then came those almost daily full-page ads in the trade papers. The voter admitted that they still believe Diana gave the best performance of all the nominees, but said that the only way Academy members could stop what they viewed as a horrible circus of over-the-top campaigning was by casting a protest vote. This voter specifically stated that was why they voted for Liza Minnelli instead of Ross, suggesting that others may have done the same thing, ultimately costing Ross the Oscar, despite her powerful and critically acclaimed performance in her very first film role. Fact 15. Director Sidney Furie later sued. Over soundtrack, director Sidney Furie filed a lawsuit in June of 1973 against Berry Gordy, Motown Productions, and other parties involved in Lady Sings the Blues, claiming that he had not been paid his rightful share of the substantial revenues generated by the film's incredibly successful soundtrack album. The Lady Sings the Blues soundtrack had become a massive commercial hit, reaching #1 on the Billboard album chart and becoming Motown's fastest-selling album up to that point in the company's history, which meant there was a significant amount of money being generated from record sales that Furie believed he was legally entitled to receive. According to the lawsuit, Furie was specifically seeking the publisher's share of the music revenues that came from the soundtrack, arguing that his contract entitled him to a portion of these profits as the film's director. The dispute highlighted the complex financial arrangements and potential conflicts that can arise when a film produces a highly profitable soundtrack album, especially when the production company also owns a major record label like Motown, creating situations where the lines between film revenues and music revenues can become blurred or contested. The legal filing indicated that there was disagreement between Furie and the Motown team about who was owed what percentage of the soundtrack profits and whether those obligations had been properly fulfilled. Unfortunately, the historical record does not clearly document how this lawsuit was ultimately resolved, or whether Furie and Gordy reached some kind of settlement agreement, leaving the final outcome of this financial dispute unknown to the public. Unknown to the public. Unknown to the public. Unknown to the